Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Office, a case conceptualization of work addiction. My name is Kaylin Adams. It's currently December of 2024. So today we're going to be discussing Liz, who is a 38-year-old Cuban American woman. She works in a high-profile position within a talent agency. So Liz's role is demanding and it requires her to manage recruitment for her agency, have really good relationships with clients, contract, marketing, and social engagements that typically go beyond normal business hour. Liz did identify that her days often are 14-hour days just so she can meet the requirements of her job, which has led to chronic stress, disrupted sleep, and significant negative impacts on her personal life. Liz did identify that her work has interfered with her romantic relationships, which often end because, in her words, her partners didn't understand the importance of my work. I do believe there's a lack of understanding around work boundaries and why it would be problematic in her relationship, which is an area that will need to be explored later on. In addition to her work related struggles, Liz is also experiencing some health concerns, such as elevated cholesterol and some liver issues. Liz does attribute these health issues to the demands of her job, citing that she has to go to a lot of client dinners, she's not in control of the menus, there's also frequent drinking, which also lets us know that she is not creating those personal boundaries and willing to take ownership of her own physical health in relationships to work. So, work addiction has recently gained a little bit more attention due to the similarities to substance addiction, and things that we would see in correlation or that are in comparison to a substance addiction is compulsive behaviors, negative consequences on your life. And in Liz's case, it seems that her constant overworking really fits into this pattern of a work addiction. And then also we have the negative impacts on her physical health as well as relationships, romantic, and with her biological family. As we move on, we're going to go over some of the presenting concerns that Liz has come to us with and really kind of start off um, at the beginning for her. So, we're going to explore Liz's case. I think it's important to note that work addiction is not formally recognized in the DSM 5, though there are many characteristics that are very similar to substance addiction, such as, like I said, the compulsive behaviors, a reliance on work for emotional regulation, the negative effects on personal physical health, as well as effects on relationships. So, current research done in 2014 outlines that these characteristics, including the increase in work tolerance and also the fact that someone with a work addiction can have withdrawal symptoms when they're not working, should allude to the fact that work addiction is a real thing and it is as concerning as a substance abuse addiction. So, when dealing with the addiction as conceptualization, there's a couple different areas that I tried to touch base on to determine whether or not uh, what Liz was facing is an actual work addiction. So, for Liz, it seems that work has become a central part of her identity, which is having the physical health effects, her personal health, um, or her personal relationships are being affected, and also her emotional well being. With her work becoming a coping mechanism or a way to identify her self worth, and having these withdrawal like symptoms when she's not at work. So, the overthinking, the sleep disruptions, you could find yourself easily checking emails when you're off the clock, limiting your social engagements in order to attribute time to your work. So, it is important to note that Liz does face the added pressure of being a woman and a person of color in a high profile position. And research does show that women, especially women of color, face higher standards in the workplace, often having to prove themselves more than their white counterparts. This can explain some of Liz's tendencies to overwork as a way to kind of combat those stereotypes or biases that she's going to face in her personal and professional environment and kind of prove them wrong. It's this need to overwork in order to be seen the same as a white male counterpart who may not put in the same amount of work or hours. When beginning to do the assessments and officially coming to a diagnosis with Liz, there was a couple questions um, that kind of came to mind for me. And the first one that we always want to go to is, does it meet the criteria of the DSM-5 or additional research that aligns with addiction patterns? As already stated, work addiction is not part of the DSM-5, so it is important to look at other additional research surrounding work addiction and what it looks like, as well as the corresponding attributes of what that is. The next is, if I do feel like she has a work addiction, what assessments should or could be used to kind of strengthen that resolve and that diagnosis. And then also a differential diagnosis. Is what I'm seeing work addiction, or is it compulsive behaviors? Am I seeing work addiction, or am I seeing an escape maintained behavior? Are we also seeing anxiety or depression? Are we looking at co-occurring diagnoses as well? So to begin Liz's treatment, the first thing I would want to do is have the initial um, session with her and do a personalized interview, just to have her narrative feelings on what her relationship with her work is and how it affects her, but then also engage in some basic assessment tools. That way I can kind of start putting a numerical value with where she is at the start of services. Some of the assessments I have chosen to use is the work addiction risk test. This is so I can gauge the severity of her work addiction. I also wanted to use the family assessment device, the PHQ-9, and help identify any impact of her relationships and mental health concerns um, in respect to the work addiction itself. I also want to use the GAD-7 so I can gauge anxiety concerns, severity, as well as how often or the frequency of these anxious feelings. I also would like to do a medical history review and understand what Liz's medical history is, especially in regards to her cholesterol and liver concerns, just to make sure it's holistic, it's inclusive, and we are addressing her mental and physical health as they could be correlated. I want to make sure that this assessment process is very tailored to Liz's treatment and what her needs are in areas that I feel or I agree with Liz that she's identified as an area of concern. After the interview, assessment, and the review of her medical information, then I would start processing different treatment options and what I felt is the best course of action to take with Liz based on her needs. So, to address Liz's concerns, there are a couple different options that could be considered. However, with cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, it's really an effective choice when it comes to treating addiction. Um, so, CBT will help a client recognize and restructure unhelpful thoughts and behaviors that is contributing to their addiction specific issues. So, in Liz's case, work. So, given that Liz's current struggles are rooted in the present, CBT is ideal because it focuses on the here and the now without having to do a deep dive into like trauma or ACEs or narrative therapy necessarily. It really just focuses on what's going on right now. It also addresses um, issues such as work is a source of self work, and also why there's a need for a balance between personal life and work. It also will addresses Liz's behavioral patterns, including overworking, neglecting her personal time, or personal relationships. One key component of CBT um, is behavioral activation, which encourages clients to engage in activities outside of their work. Um, and for Liz, this could involve activities such as going on a date to increase that romantic relationship or spending some quality time with her family, both which allows her to set boundaries with work, taking time off, and also really fostering and harnessing some of those personal relationships that have suffered. Um, Another CBT practice that I would like to see for Liz is a thought journal. It's just a tool to help her track distressing thoughts between sessions, such as worrying about if she skips this client dinner, how that's going to impact her job. If she doesn't drink with this client, how is that going to reflect on her? That way we can address those anxious thoughts and the negative thoughts that she's having, and that gives us a good opportunity to reframe what those thoughts are to a healthier alternative so she could start facing each one of those strategies. The other alternative is acceptance and commitment therapy or ACT, excuse me. This is another option which would encourage Liz to accept difficult thoughts and emotions instead of challenging them. So remember in CBT, we're going to challenge those thoughts. In ACT, what we're going to do is accept that negative thoughts happen. So ACT can help Liz focus on her core values, such as her family, her culture, relationships, and redefining those priorities and how to navigate her work-life balance and the issue that it's causing her. It's really useful in addressing pressure she faces as a woman or a person of color in the workplace because it doesn't really eliminate the negative thoughts and try to change the negative thoughts. It's more of recognizing that everyone has negative thoughts and accepting these feelings and not allowing those feelings to dictate her actions. So by refocusing on her core values such as family, culture, relationships, ACT can help create a stronger sense of self-worth um, outside of her career, which will help encourage appropriate boundaries at work. So while Liz is also reconnecting with her Cuban roots and her family values and spending more time, it could actually minimize her intense focus that she has on work while also naturally redeveloping a support system, which she's going to need if this is a true work addiction. Um, and that is really great for trying to balance out her work life dynamic. And also, it makes her web a little bit bigger. So when she's trying to fill those personal relationships and grow those, she does have somebody to go back to and also understand that she does want to be respected as a professional and she does have every right to have those ambitions, but also kind of support her in drawing those lines in the sand with her work and having that balance in a healthy way. Now, CBT and ACT both have benefits. They are different in their approaches. Like I said, CBT challenges and will reframe unhelpful thoughts, while ACT encourages the acceptance of those negative thoughts and just not having physical actions related to those thoughts or influenced by those thoughts. So both of these therapeutic outcomes can be used together, so they can complement one another. For example, if Liz finds that maybe challenging her thoughts at first doesn't work as effectively as she hoped, or it's not moving as quickly, then maybe ACT technique is something that could come in to help her accept and move forward from the negative thoughts instead of trying to challenge them, at least at the beginning. Both therapies are designed to be short term. Um, you can add sessions as needed, so it is very person centered, which is good in these cases. Just like Liz, because it may take a little bit longer, especially when dealing with a financial work addiction, because that does ingrain itself very commonly in someone's life. Um, and it does allow for a shift in treatment approaches as needed. However, ultimately, the choice of therapy will depend on Liz's progress and how she responds to each technique, and also about how she is verbalizing her feelings towards each one of those. If she feels one is better, regardless of the way that I am interpreting the results, it is important to take that into consideration and make sure that she is part of this process to make sure the therapeutic buy-in is there for Liz. So while working with Liz, it's important to establish some short-term goals for her, um, especially ones that are obtainable, so she can see some success, which is encouraging to keep moving. So the short-term objectives are going to focus on something that's immediate, it's actionable changes that she can implement right away. It's something that's typically she can see success. So one of them that I would want to set for her is establishing clear boundaries at work. So Liz will work on identifying specific boundaries around her work hours and implementing them. Uh, the other would be improving stress management techniques. So Liz will learn to practice coping strategies such as deep breathing, mindfulness, um, muscle relaxation, or anything related to a way to cope with her work related stress. And that may mean doing things like yoga or working out that also would have a physical health benefit to combat the other aspect of what's going on with Liz, which is her physical health. The third goal would be enhancing relationship dynamics, as mentioned before, reconnecting with family or exploring social activities outside of work, because we notice that Liz identified that work does give social activities, but they're not positively impacting her personal, emotional, or physical health. So finding something there to fit that need. And this doesn't have to be romantic. It could be just reconnecting with an old friend or possibly finding a new one. Now, long-term goals are a little bit different because it's something we would want to be exploring throughout therapy and even want to extend outside of therapy once these sessions are coming to an end and Liz carries these out into her daily practice as goals for herself. So one of them would be reducing her work addiction. So Liz will aim to reduce her overall work hours and reliance on work for self worth, with a goal of transitioning to a healthier, more balanced relationships with her career. So, this might involve her setting sustainable work limits or incorporating, something on a personal pursuit that would be more fulfilling to take up some of that time that she would previously be working or thinking about work, but now she could do, such as painting. Um, Two, an improved emotional well being. So, wanting to make sure Liz is working towards managing any kind of anxiety or depressive symptoms that she has from work related activities, and then also applying the coping skills that she's learned through therapy and kind of reduce that dependency on work as her emotional regulation, like mediator, and instead start depending on herself for that feeling. And the last one is making sure that we're going to strengthen those personal relationships. In the long term, we want Liz to create and maintain a meaningful personal connection that's possibly romantic, possibly just a friendship, but also kind of build those deeper bonds with her family. And this could include addressing underlying beliefs about her own self worth and moving towards this holistic sense of self and identity that goes beyond her professional life. Some of the dual diagnosis consideration for me was anxiety and depression. Um, and it doesn't necessarily mean that these are differential diagnoses as much as just a dual diagnosis. So, generalized anxiety disorder, it's very common that we would see this with someone that has high work stress or anxiety surrounding work. Depression, we would see with as an effect of working long hours, having strained relationships, so there's some isolation aspects in there. And then also health issues as your body is starting to almost fight you. It is this mortality thought of, your body is betraying you. So Liz's case also raises some concerns about potential co-occurring diagnoses, and we need to make sure that we are being respectable to her chronic stress and her strained relationships, anxiety, depression, um, and also how we could address those. CBT is something that we mentioned for her work addiction, but it's also an effective tool for treating both anxiety and depression. So that is something that would be beneficial um, to identify that if she does have these symptoms and this dual diagnosis, working that into either a short term or long term goal for her. Signs of anxiety can appear for Liz as excessive worry about her health, even due to work, while depressive symptoms could emerge from, burnout from overworking. So, making sure that we're using these standardized assessments also helps in determining the severity of these symptoms. And it kind of helps develop where the focus needs to be first, second, and third, and then additionally moving forward. I think it's important to mention how ongoing monitoring would be through these identified sessions. So initially, we took assessments that would have numerical values. So to monitor Liz's progress and ensure her treatment plan is remaining effective for her, I would utilize a combination of the assessments given initially, as well as making sure we're having some structured check-ins at each one of the sessions. So some of the goals that I've established, I feel like that's a really good benchmark for her progress to follow up on those. And making sure that I'm giving attention to see what steps she is taking to meet each one of those goals, either by herself or, homework assignments that I've given her. I want to make sure that, she can tell me about her relationship dynamics and what's changing and verbalize how they're improving. I would like to take the initial assessment scores and compare them to later assessment scores. So, revisiting each one of those assessments during regular intervals, such as every 2 to 3 weeks, to assess any changes in her mental health status, I think is really important. Also, it helps see if anything that we're implementing is showing a decrease in any of these symptoms and their severity or the frequency of the symptoms that we're seeing. Let's see. Finally, I think that we can use some informal methods such as her thought journal that I mentioned earlier and track, is there a decrease in her recording stressful situation or unhealthy thought patterns? Are we seeing a change in the way that she is thinking and the way that she is having experiences relating to work or these boundaries or her personal lives? And is there a shift occurring? We can review her thought journals during the session itself and go over each entry and discuss any patterns or reoccurring issues, and also ask her to do some ongoing self reflection here while we're looking through her thought journals to see if she notices a difference from day 1 to day 10 to day 15 to day 30, and really kind of put that on her a little bit to do the work and do the analysis of her own thoughts and how they're changing. Level of care was the next section that was needed for Liz. I did determine for Liz that intensive outpatient program would be the best program for Liz, just to balance health, work, and social needs. So determining her level of care was really crucial. The American Society of Addiction Medicine outlines 4 different levels of care that ranges from outpatient to inpatient treatment. Given Liz's situation, I felt like intensive outpatient program is the most appropriate. Um, Liz's high work demands, financial pressure make inpatient care less feasible as it could lead to financial hardships. And most of us by now understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so if Liz is unable to work, then she does not have the financial capital to make sure that she has a home, shelter, food, clothing, and those basic necessities are met. So I can't be asking her to be doing self-actualization if she can't meet those needs. And whereas I did cross the page of, well, if she's inpatient, her basic needs would be met. However, there is that then fear that upon discharge, she would not be able to maintain her life or lifestyle. So I feel like there is a step that we would have to discuss with Liz, that setting the appropriate boundaries at her current job and how we can work with her current financial institution. And if that job is perhaps not healthy for her, transitioning to a job that has less job requirements that are more indicative of what she needs for her emotional and mental health well-being. And then also transitioning into the possibility of changing her lifestyle, because maybe that does mean a pay cut. And so maybe that will affect how she pays for clothing or the place she's allowed to live or her modes of transportation. And wanting to make sure that we are engaging and acknowledging that some level of financial stability is mandatory for survival. Whereas substance abuse addiction, it's easy to say, let's go cold turkey because we're looking at the physical health aspect on it. But generally, once we've went through withdrawal, there is no need. I don't utilize a substance in order to pay a bill or to feed me, that's not the same correlation. Whereas you do have to work in order to really survive in this society at all. So making sure that Liz is able to focus on those boundary settings is going to be a very big deal on whether she maintains her current employment or needs to find additional employment. But at the end of the day, maintaining that her basic needs are being met is going to be primary. And so I thought inpatient would make it really hard upon discharge. However, if we kept the therapy sessions more spread out and a little bit more casual, there'd be less of an urgency for Liz to make the changes that she needs. And the seriousness of it, I feel, would not be taken if it wasn't the intensive program. So, addition to everything we've already talked about, there are also cultural considerations that we really need to take into consideration when it comes to Liz. As a minority group, it's often that they face a very unique challenge that really can drive some work related behaviors. So, therapy itself should be culturally informed and being mindful of these factors. So, when considering cultural factors in Liz's treatment, it is essential to acknowledge her Cuban American identity, the cultural background, and how it significantly influenced how Liz perceives her career, her relationships, her mental health. um, Reviewing how Latin cultures, there's a strong emphasis on family values and personal sacrifice and hard work, and how that measures a person's success. It could explain why she places such a high value on her job and works relentlessly, potentially seeing it as a way to provide for her family or uphold those cultural expectations of success or provide a monetary relationship versus a personal quality type relationship. It can also create internal conflict because Liz's work addiction may be partially fueled by the desire to meet cultural expectations, but also understanding that Liz's culture places a high value on relationships, specifically within the family. So she is torn between A and B while trying to maintain um, that heritage, and that itself could be a source of her distress. Also acknowledging her being a woman and being seen as less than her male counterparts. So making sure that everything I do is culturally sensitive. I am acknowledging her values without pathologizing them. It's important for me to create this space where Liz feels like she's understood as an individual, but also as a person of her specific culture. And also, her citation comes into play because it's also linked to a minority group. The fact that she is a female, that she is Cuban American, it is all part of who she is, and integrating all of this information in her therapy really addresses the importance, and it helps reset those values a little bit and restrike a balance between her career and personal life. Hopefully, that will encourage a meaningful change for her. So, some of my final recommendations are just like a synopsis a little bit for Liz's treatment plan. I really think the focus needs to be on establishing work boundaries, setting some realistic goals for a work life balance, addressing her health issues. I do feel like cognitive behavioral therapy will help Liz challenge those negative thoughts. And I do feel like ACT or acceptance and commitment therapy will help her accept and manage those difficult emotions at times when she cannot or is not able to challenge those and reset herself, learning how to work through those kind of work pressures and distressing thoughts and feelings. Overall, Liz's treatment, I think, is going to be guided really by her willingness to engage in the therapy, take responsibility for these changes, and really push herself to change. It is important that Liz does feel empowered by me and by her decision making and treatment planning. So, again, I stress short term goals that she can see quick success on to encourage her to keep moving forward. Um, Combining both CBT and ACT and focusing on her individual needs, I think we can ensure that Liz is receiving the most effective care possible and help her move towards a more balanced and fulfilling life. As I think about Liz in the future and what looking ahead for her looks like, obviously, since I'm choosing two techniques that are short term, It is obviously giving her skills and tools that she's going to be able to carry out when she is no longer in sessions. So, making sure that what she is learning and how she is growing is sustainable outside of therapy sessions for her work life balance. I think a key part of this is going to be helping Liz establish the boundaries at her work and working through what it is like to talk to somebody or HR or her boss about what is going on, even role playing if needed to help her feel more comfortable in setting those boundaries and not feeling like less of a person or that her value has gone down. Prioritizing her physical and mental health is important, and then her personal relationships. I would like to think that by exploring Liz's deeper motivations for overworking, such as like if it is actually linked to self-worth or her cultural pressures, um, that by addressing those things, we could also help develop a lasting change. Not that I feel like that needs to be the primary focus of therapy, but I do think it's something that might need to occur afterwards, maybe some talk or narrative therapy, um, to address some of those things that maybe have swayed the way she thinks, the way she does, and influenced her. And really just focusing on the here and now and what is needed for Liz. So, as we kind of wrap up this discussion today, I want to make sure to highlight the potential for growth and transformation for Liz's journey, even though work addiction specifically is very hard to understand because it is something that we need in order to maintain survival. It's it definitely challenged my thought process because I wanted to instantly be like, well, we need to take time off work. But then realistically, as I sat here and thought of my own life, how hard that would be if I didn't have a job and I couldn't pay my bills, I couldn't care for my child, and what that looks like. So it's not about just fixing a simple problem for her. It's about making sure that we are fostering long-term sustainable changes that will bring a really good balance um, to Liz in her life, whether it be happiness or fulfillment or her thought processes, her personal relationship with her family, romantic, peers. I do feel by setting those short term goals and objective, it helps encourage Liz to keep moving, but then also giving her long term goals has an opportunity for Liz to kind of redefine what success looks like for her, not just in career, but her personal life, her emotional well being, her physical health, her relationships. And I personally feel like for Liz, it is going to end up being a journey of self discovery growth, and that healing that will probably go outside of my initial sessions where I'm focusing solely on the work addiction, where she is going to have an opportunity once the here and now is taken care of and that stress is removed and she is able to look inside herself and kind of heal and empower and thrive in ways that she didn't know was possible. And as her clinician, I would get to see the growth and be a part of her journey. And I think that's actually really cool that even though I may not be there at the end of her journey, because she may choose a different route, or there may be another clinician that would have better experience in what she needs moving forward, whether it be EMDR or anything like that, that I still get to be there at the beginning of her journey. And you never know, perhaps she keeps in touch, so you're, a piece of that forever. Um, so yeah, that's Liz, and I want to thank everybody for being present for this case conceptualization of Liz and processing through this kind of work addiction with me, um, because it was a little bit tougher than I expected. And I really just appreciate everybody's input throughout the course and would love any feedback anyone would love to offer me. Have a nice night.